Welcome to our deep dive into Romans 5, 6 to 8.
All right.
And I think we both can agree that listeners to this show probably already have a pretty good grasp of the verse itself.
Yeah, I'd say so.
So we really want to take this deep dive in a different direction.
Okay.
Instead of the typical stuff you might hear in a Sunday sermon, we're going to explore some of the more unique interpretations and sermon illustrations that really pack a punch.
Interesting.
We're also going to take a look at how different pastors have approached this passage in some pretty surprising ways.
I like it.
So think of this as a masterclass in mining Romans 5, 6 to 8 for fresh insights you can share with your congregations.
Sounds good, and I'm really excited to see what we uncover.
Me too. And you know what's really fascinating is the material we have for this deep dive comes from 4 different churches.
Oh, wow.
And each one takes a completely different angle on Romans 5, 6 to 8, which just goes to show how rich this text really is.
Yeah, that's what I love about studying scripture. There's always something new to discover.
Absolutely. So let's hear those sermon titles.
Okay, so we have Embracing God's Unchanging Faithfulness in Every Circumstance from the Flame Church.
Oh, okay.
Then there's Embracing Brokenness, God's Pursuit and Redemption from Westover Church.
Okay.
And Embracing the Great Exchange, a Father's Day reflection from Hope City Community Church.
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, Embracing Faith, the power of baptism and sacrifice from New Hope.
Wow, talk about a range.
Right. It's pretty amazing to see how each church has found a way to tailor the message to their specific congregation.
Yeah, and while they're all coming from different perspectives, they all remain grounded in that core message of Romans 5, 6 to 8.
Exactly.
All right, so let's jump into the specifics, starting with the Flame Church and their sermon, Embracing God's Unchanging Faithfulness in Every Circumstance.
Okay.
They really zeroed in on the word yet in the passage. For while we were still weak at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly.
Right.
Yet just hit you right between the eyes.
It does.
It really hammers home the point that God's love is present even when we're not at our best.
You know, it's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking that we need to be perfect to earn God's love, but this verse reminds us that that's just not true.
It's so true. And I love how the Flame Church connected that concept to the idea of God's grace being renewed daily, like the manna provided to the Israelites in the desert.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's not just a one-time gift. It's a constant source of strength and sustenance.
I like that analogy.
And to really bring that point home,
Yeah.
they shared the story of Thomas Chisum.
Thomas Chisum.
Yeah, the hymn writer behind Great is Thy Faithfulness.
Oh, wow.
Now, talk about a life that embodied God's faithfulness.
Really? What's his story?
Well, Chisholm faced some really tough times. Health issues, financial struggles, you name it.
Oh, wow.
But despite all that, his faith in God never wavered.
That's incredible.
It's a powerful reminder that God is always there for us, no matter what we're going through.
I like.
Now let's move on to Westover Church and their sermon, Embracing Brokenness, God's Pursuit and Redemption.
Okay, this one sounds intriguing.
They take a very different approach, really highlighting the idea of God actively seeking us out, even in our messiness.
Huh. So they're not shying away from the tough stuff.
Not at all. In fact, they go all the way back to Genesis 3.15.
Wow, that's a bold move.
It is. They even reference Charles Spurgeon calling it the first gospel sermon.
I've never heard it put that way before, but it makes sense.
Right. And by connecting that back to Romans 5, 6 to 8, they paint this picture of God's persistent pursuit of humanity throughout history.
Yeah, I can see how that would resonate with people who feel far from God.
Exactly. It's a reminder that no matter how far we've strayed, we're never beyond his reach.
That's a powerful message of hope.
Absolutely. Now, for something completely different, let's talk about Hope City Community Church and their Father's Day sermon, Embracing the Great Exchange.
Ooh, a Father's Day theme. I'm curious to hear this one.
They take a very visceral approach, really leaning into vivid imagery to illustrate Jesus' sacrifice.
Interesting. What kind of imagery?
Well, they call it a wild exchange. We bring our sin and brokenness, and Jesus offers his perfect life in return.
Wow, that's a powerful way to put it.
It really is. It makes the abstract concept of grace feel so much more tangible.
Yeah, I can see how that would connect with people on an emotional level.
And to make it even more relatable, they use the analogy of a gym spotter.
A gym spotter.
Yeah, you know how a spotter steps in when you can't lift the weight yourself?
Right.
They use that to illustrate God's role in our lives.
I like that.
It's a clever way to show that God is always there to support us when we falter.
Yeah, I think that would resonate with a lot of people.
And then to really drive that point home, they share this truly heart-wrenching story of a father sacrificing himself to save his son from a septic tank.
Oh,
Such a
wow.
powerful parallel to Jesus' sacrifice for us.
Yeah, I can see how that would leave a lasting impact on people.
Definitely. All right, for our last church, we have New Hope and their sermon, Embracing Faith, the Power of Baptism and Sacrifice.
Okay, this one sounds like it might be a bit more theological.
It is. They do a great job of bridging the Old and New Testaments.
Oh, so?
Well, they present Jesus' sacrifice as the ultimate fulfillment of the Old Testament sacrificial system.
That makes sense.
And they use this really vivid image of the cross as a bridge over the chasm of sin.
Oh, I like that.
It's a powerful metaphor that helps listeners understand the profound impact of Christ's death.
Yeah, it really brings it to life.
Then they tie in the Apostles' Creed and its historical context as a defense against heresy.
That's interesting.
It's a unique way to show how Romans 5:6-8
Mhm.
has shaped Christian thought throughout history.
Yeah, it gives the passage a lot more weight.
It does. It reminds us that these are not just nice-sounding ideas, but truths that have been wrestled with and affirmed for centuries.
That's a great point.
So there you have it, 4 drastically different approaches to Romans 5:6-8 each, with its own unique insights and sermon illustrations.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
It is, but it's so exciting to see how much depth there is to this passage.
Yeah, it really speaks to us on so many different levels, offering comfort, challenge, and inspiration.
Exactly. It's a reminder that God's love is for us even when we're weak, broken, and far from perfect.
And that's a message that everyone needs to hear.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how these pastors use storytelling to bring Romans 5:6-8 to life.
Yeah, they go way beyond just explaining the theology.
It's about connecting with people on an emotional level, making those ancient truths feel real and relevant.
Right, like the Flame Church, using the story of that Olympic diver who's miraculously saved.
Oh, yeah, the one where it looked like the shadow of a cross shielded her from the fall.
Exactly. It's like a modern-day miracle story.
Yeah.
It gives their message this sense of wonder and immediacy.
It's powerful stuff, for sure. Makes you think about how God might be working in our lives in ways we don't even realize.
Absolutely. And then you have Hope City using something as ordinary as a gym spotter to explain God's role in our lives.
I see what they were going for, but I'm not sure if the gym spotter analogy really captures the complexity of our dependence on God.
Yeah, I get that it could be seen as a bit oversimplified.
Like, it might suggest this transactional relationship. We do our part, and God steps in when we need help.
Right. But I think the pastor's intention was to emphasize God's constant presence and support, not to reduce faith to some kind of formula.
True, and for some people, that simple image of the spotter might be exactly what they need to hear.
Yeah, it's relatable. Everyone understands the idea of needing a spotter when you're lifting heavy weights.
Makes the abstract concept of God's support a little more concrete.
Exactly. And speaking of concrete, that story from Hope City about the father sacrificing himself to save his son from the septic tank.
Oh man, that one was tough to hear.
I know, it's such a visceral illustration of Jesus' sacrifice, though.
It is, but do you think it risks being a little too graphic for some people?
Possibly it's a delicate balance. You want to evoke emotion, but you don't want to overwhelm people or distract from the message.
Right. In this case, I think the pastor handled it well, using the story to point directly to the depth of God's love.
Yeah, but it's definitely an illustration that requires careful consideration and sensitivity to your audience.
Absolutely. Now, New Hope takes a different approach, grounding Romans 5:6-8 in the historical context of the Apostles' Creed.
Right. What a unique way to connect this passage to the broader sweep of Christian history.
It's brilliant by highlighting the Creed's role as a defense against heresy. They remind listeners that these aren't just nice-sounding ideas.
Yeah, these are truths that have been fiercely defended and debated for centuries.
Exactly. It adds this layer of authority and weight to your message.
It does. It invites listeners to see themselves as part of this long lineage of believers wrestling with these same questions of faith.
And it subtly positions Romans 5:6-8 as a foundational text.
One that shaped the very documents that define Christian belief.
Exactly. Now, speaking of foundational texts, Westover Church takes us all the way back to Genesis 3:15.
Right, highlighting that concept of God's pursuit of humanity from the very beginning.
They draw on Charles Spurgeon's words, calling it the first gospel sermon.
Bold claim, but I think it holds up.
It does. By going back to the fall, they establish this idea that God's redemptive plan was set in motion from the moment humanity went astray.
Right, it links the beginning and the end, creation and redemption.
It's profound when you think about it.
It also underscores the idea that God's love isn't reactive, it's proactive.
He's not waiting for us to get our act together. He's actively seeking us out. drawing us back to himself.
It's a beautiful and hopeful message.
It really is, goes to the heart of the gospel.
Okay, so we've talked about the storytelling and the unique interpretations, but what about practical applications? How do these sermons help listeners apply Romans 5, 6 to 8 to their own lives?
Well, the Flame Church, with their focus on daily grace, encourages people to lean into God's faithfulness in their everyday lives.
That's so important, especially in today's world.
Right. It's so easy to get caught up in the striving, the achieving, the endless to-do lists.
And we can easily fall into that trap of thinking we need to earn God's love, that our worth is tied to our accomplishments.
The Flame Church's message cuts through all of that.
It does. It reminds us that God's love is freely given, a gift to be received.
Not something we need to earn or achieve.
It's about shifting the focus from our performance to God's faithfulness.
From striving to surrender.
And that surrender is key. It's in letting go of the need to control, to prove ourselves, that we truly open ourselves up to experience God's grace.
Now, while the Flame Church focuses on the individual experience of grace, Westover Church, with their emphasis on God's pursuit, challenges listeners to embrace their own brokenness and allow God to work in their lives.
It's a powerful call to vulnerability and authenticity.
Right. It's so tempting, especially in church settings, to put on a facade, to pretend we have it all together.
But Westover Church challenges us to drop the act, to acknowledge our need for God's transforming grace.
It's a reminder that we don't have to be perfect to come to God.
In fact, it's often in our weakness, in our brokenness, that we experience His grace most powerfully.
And it's in those moments of vulnerability, when we allow ourselves to be seen for who we truly are, that genuine connection and transformation can happen.
Then we have Hope City challenging listeners to respond to God's grace with gratitude and love.
They use that great example of King David dancing before the Lord.
Oh yeah, a display of unashamed joy and abandon.
It's a powerful reminder that our response to grace shouldn't be passive or subdued.
It should be an outpouring of joy, of celebration, of surrender.
It's about recognizing the magnitude of what God has done for us and responding with our whole hearts.
And it's about letting that gratitude overflow into every aspect of our lives.
And it's not just about personal piety.
It's about living a life that reflects God's love and mercy.
Exactly. And that leads us nicely to New Hope, who encourage listeners to live out their faith through acts of service and selflessness.
They connect this back to the idea of sacrifice.
Reminding us that following Jesus isn't just about intellectual assent or emotional experience.
It's about taking up our cross and following Him, even when it's costly.
It's about letting our faith shape our actions, demonstrating God's love to the world through our words and deeds.
And that's a powerful challenge for all of us, not just pastors and Bible study leaders.
It is. It's about asking ourselves, how is my life reflecting the radical grace I've received?
So we've seen how these sermons offer unique interpretations, powerful illustrations, and practical applications of Romans 5, 6 to 8.
What are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, they're tasked with bringing this passage to life for their congregations.
It seems like the biggest takeaway is the importance of finding creative and engaging ways to communicate this timeless message.
These pastors have shown us that it's possible to stay true to the biblical text while still speaking to the hearts and minds of contemporary audiences.
They've given us a toolbox full of ideas.
They have. From personal anecdotes to thought-provoking questions, from unexpected sources to historical connections, they've demonstrated the power of storytelling.
The importance of personal connection and the need to make ancient truths relevant for today's world.
Now, before we wrap up, let's reflect on the impact these sermons can have on listeners.
Yeah, what kind of transformation can we expect to see in people who truly grasp the message of Romans 5, 6 to 8?
When you think about it, it's amazing the impact this one passage can have.
Yeah.
For those who are wrestling with guilt and shame, Romans 5, 6 to 8 offers this profound message of forgiveness and acceptance.
It's a powerful reminder that they are loved unconditionally, regardless of their past mistakes or perceived shortcomings.
It cuts through all the noise of the world. All those voices telling us we need to earn love and acceptance.
And it reminds us that God's grace is a free gift.
Yeah, it's not because we deserve it.
It's simply because of who He is.
And it's that radical grace, that unwavering love that can break the chains of condemnation.
Absolutely.
And set people free to experience the joy of a relationship with God.
It allows them to come to Him just as they are.
Broken, messy, in desperate need of His grace.
It's interesting because it's often in that place of surrender.
Yeah.
Of acknowledging our need for God. That true transformation takes place.
That's a good point. And we see this throughout Scripture.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, think of Zacchaeus, the tax collector.
Oh, yeah.
He was so moved by Jesus' acceptance that he repented and vowed to make restitution for his past wrongs.
It's a great example of how encountering God's grace can lead to genuine repentance.
And a desire to live a life aligned with his will.
It's not about earning God's favor.
It's about responding to his love with a changed heart.
Exactly. And for those who feel lost and directionless, Romans 5:6-8 can provide a sense of purpose and belonging.
Right. It reminds them they are part of something much bigger than themselves.
This grand narrative of redemption.
That God is weaving throughout history.
And it invites them to step into that story.
To discover their unique role in God's unfolding plan.
It's about trading a life of aimless wandering
For a life of purpose and meaning.
And then for those facing trials and tribulations, Romans 5:6-8 offers a wellspring of hope and strength.
Reminding them God is with them in their suffering.
Offering comfort and support even in the darkest of times.
You know, it can transform despair into resilience.
Fear into courage.
Weakness into strength.
It's a reminder that even when we can't see the way forward,
God is still working.
and His grace is sufficient to carry us through.
It's the kind of message that can sustain people through unimaginable hardship.
Giving them the strength to persevere even when everything seems lost.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Romans 5:6-8, I think it's clear that this is more than just an ancient text
Right.
to be studied and analyzed.
It's so much more.
It's a living, breathing word that has the potential to transform lives,
Absolutely.
to bring healing and hope, and to ignite a passion for living a life that reflects God's love.
And as we've seen from these 4 sermons, there are countless ways to approach this passage.
Yeah, to mine its depths
Yeah.
and to make its message relevant and accessible.
For today's audiences.
Whether it's through storytelling, vivid imagery, historical connections, or personal vulnerability.
There are so many ways to bring Romans 5:6-8 to life for our congregations.
The key is to be creative, to be bold, and to never underestimate the power of this timeless message.
To touch hearts and change lives.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Romans 5:6-8.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you've gained some fresh insights and practical tools to use in your own ministries.
We encourage you to continue exploring this passage.
Allow its truths to shape your preaching, your teaching, and your own walk with God.
Until next time.
Keep seeking, keep learning, and keep diving deep.